Hi, I'm Fran Stephens, the Director for Pre-Award Services at the University of Oklahoma. Today we're going to talk about navigating NSF proposal submission processes. This is actually part one of a three-part series. This is the series. So today we're going to be looking at some background information that will help you understand how NSF operates and some things that you might consider as you're looking at doing a proposal with NSF. So this is all from NSF's website. There's a lot of good information there. The National Science Foundation is an independent federal agency that was created by Congress. Pay particular attention to what they have been chartered to do, which is promote progress of science, advance national health, prosperity and welfare, and secure national defense. An average proposal to NSF is 3 years or less. Their goals of what they're looking to fund are usually related to discovery, learning, and research infrastructure, both new infrastructure and stewardship of current infrastructure. Another essential element is support for science and engineering education from pre-K to graduate school and beyond. And they're looking for education that's integrated with the research that's being done in hopes of having skilled research scientists in the future. The leadership is a director that's appointed by Congress and a 24-member National Science Board that's also approved by Congress. And the Science Board is on a 6-year term. They're divided into 7 directorates that support science, engineering, research, and education. Each of the directorates is headed by an assistant director and then further subdivided into different divisions related to the interest of that particular division. So for example, ocean scientist or research in Alaska or Antarctica. In each division, there are numerous program officers. Most of those are serving on a rotating schedule of 2 to 3 years. They support basic research and the education of people to help create knowledge to transform the future for the United States. They look at the progress of science, advancing national health, prosperity, welfare, and securing the national defense. I'm mentioning this twice because it's very important that you understand what they're chartered to look at. You won't see a lot of solicitations related to actually health like you would in the National Institutes for Health types of proposals, but you'll see things related to technology related to health, technology related to improvements in prosperity or being able to commercialize something that's going to help the prosperity of the United States, and proposals related to defense or that could be used to help on defense related research. They accept proposals that are submitted to specific solicitations, and they also accept proposals that are unsolicited. So if you just have an ideal and you think NSF might be interested to it, you don't have to have a particular solicitation that covers your ideal. You can put in an unsolicited proposal. Their funding opportunities fall into 3 categories. They're called program descriptions, program announcements, and program solicitations. Most of the time, their program descriptions are going to have a PD number in front of them. Many times, these don't have like specific solicitations related to them. They're going to refer you back to the general guidelines for your information on what to submit for that proposal, but they're going to give you a general idea of something that they're interested in as a program. Both program announcements and program solicitations normally will have a number that starts with like an NSF and then 19-215 or 20-2020. So they'll usually have their number starts with NSF. An announcement's usually in a general area of high interest. A solicitation is usually a more specific type of solicitation or proposal call where they're looking for something and they're going to give you specific criteria of what they want your submission to meet. The most recent update to the general guidance for NSF is 20-1, and that was effective for most parts June the 1st in 2020. And I'll go into that more in a little bit. In 2017, NSF replaced their grant proposal guide and their award administration guide. They had two different documents, and they combined those into one. And they call that the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. And most of the time, you'll hear everybody refer to it as PAPPG. So the PAPPG is your general guidelines for anything that's being submitted to the National Science Foundation. You have to follow the PAPPG unless the specific solicitation says something in it that wants you to deviate, either to include something extra or to not include something. The only exception to that is if you get permission to do something different from a program officer or an assistant director, and they'll send you either an email or a letter that you have to include with your submission where they gave you this permission. So know that when you're writing your proposal, most of the time, you're going to be using two documents, the general guidelines and the specific solicitation that you're submitting to. And please make sure that you're using the most current versions. If you're doing an unsolicited proposal, that is going to fall under the PAPPG. So when you're selecting the proposal that you're submitting to, you're going to select whatever the current number is for the PAPPG. So if you were going to do one tomorrow, you would go in and the package that you would pull in Fastlane or research.gov would be NSF 20-1. And that's what you would base all of the contents of your files on. When a submission is done, normally the organization is considered the person, quote, that's doing the submission. There are very few NSF proposals that are paid to individuals. They'll all go through the university, except for just a handful of fellowships. And if you have other organizations that are going to be involved with you on a submission, you need to make sure that they're also registered with NSF. And to do that, they'll need a DUNS number or a universal ID number and a SAMS registration. And OU has all of these. So if you see anything that comes up in a solicitation that says you need to obtain a DUNS number or a SAM registration or register with Fastlane, know that OU has all those taken care of. If you as a PI or anybody on your team doesn't have an NSF registration, then you do need to take care of that. So types of proposals that NSF accepts are letters of intent. These are mainly used to see if there's any conflict of interest and for the program officer to look at a little information about your proposal to see if they're interested in seeing anything further from you on this particular idea. Usually it can be submitted by the PI, but there are a few that have been set up so that they have to be submitted by ORS, which would be the SRO or AOR submission. Sometimes submitting a letter of intent is required. You have to do it before you can do anything else in a submission step. And sometimes they're just requested. The program officer just wants an idea of what kind of interest there is. Sometimes they have hard deadlines, so you need to make sure that you pay attention to that, because if it has a hard deadline and it's required and you miss it, then you won't be allowed to go further with a full submission or whatever is required as the next step. A preliminary proposal or a pre-proposal is also usually used for some type of conflict of interest use, and many times it has what is called a go or no-go indication. So if you are asked to do a preliminary submission, they're usually going to tell you yes or no that you can go forward with a full submission. Usually they require less proposal documents. So for example, instead of having a 15-page project description, you might only have 3 pages or 6 pages. But there are some very complicated ones and some that even require more than 20 pages. So you've got to look real closely at the guidelines. Sometimes they can have a wide variety of special instructions. So don't assume because you did a preliminary last year that it has the same guidelines as this year, or if you're doing to different programs. Often they'll either have a $0 budget entry or a $2 budget entry. Usually they will require submission by the SRO or AOR, which would be someone from ORS would have to hit the final button on it for you. They usually have a hard deadline, and we're seeing more and more of them. And in fact, a couple of the recent ones we've seen the last at least 2 years have had to have detailed budgets submitted with them. So pay very close attention to the solicitation and make sure that you know what you're required to do. So both an LOI and a preliminary proposal may be required or may be requested or recommended. They may be the type where you're going to be invited to do a second step of a submission, for example, a full submission, or they may be not invite, which means they don't want to see anything from you after you submit the LOI or preliminary. And this is what's called decision final. It would be very rare for you to be able to talk a program officer into changing a not invite into an invite decision. You may also have a decision where they come back and they send you an email and they say you are encouraged or discouraged to submit a full proposal or whatever the next step is. And that's called decision advisory. So they're just advising you that you're discouraged. If you feel like you can make sufficient changes to meet weak areas that they saw, and you want to go ahead and go with a full submission, you are welcome to submit it. It does not mean that it's going to be picked for review by the program officer. They may look at it and to determine if they feel like you changed enough to make it where they were interested in it, but they're just not shutting the door in your face and telling you that you can't submit. You've noticed probably that I've mentioned a couple of times the next step of the proposal submission. There are a few times that solicitations will come out and they may require an LOR and then a preliminary and then a full proposal. So it may be kind of a 3-step process instead of just doing an LOI or a preliminary proposal and then doing a full proposal. On collaborative submissions by multiple organizations, so this is the type of submission where, let's say OU is going to be the lead, but OSU is also going to do a component of the work, and we're both going to do a submission to NSF, and it's going to be linked together. We're both going to ask for separate budgets. So on that type of submission, you only do one letter of intent or preliminary for the whole proposal. So if we were the lead, we were the ones, would be the ones that would do that submission. For a full proposal submission, this is where you're going to show all of your research information, your team, the full budget and everything. Some require a letter of intent or a preliminary submission before you can submit, and some don't. Most of the full submissions are done by the PIs in response to a specific call for proposals from NSF. So you'll have specific information that you're going to be using to develop the proposal. And usually all of the standard proposal tabs are involved in the submission. And this is actually covered in the part 2 presentation. Other types of special proposals that NSF has, they do have some. They're going to deviate from the full instructions. They may be a standalone type of submission, or you may only be allowed to do them as part of a regular submission or tied to a prior submission or an award. Some have specific budget criterias and time limits for when you can do them. Examples of some of those are like the Rapid Response Research Proposal called RAPIDS. Those are usually done in response to some event that's taken place. So if we had a tornado that came through, then NSF would be open to accepting some rapid proposals if you had research that was directly related to that tornado, and you couldn't do the research if you had to wait very long. So for example, maybe you were working in architectural research and you wanted to go and look at some of the damaged houses to collect information to use for some future research actions. So it would be important for you to get out in the field before the rubble from the houses and stuff is all cleaned up because you want to collect that information on the damage. So you would do a rapid proposal. I would keep in mind that if you're going to do a rapid proposal, you kind of almost have to have one waiting in the wings to go in, because they'll do those awards usually within 1 to 2 weeks of the event taking place. And they have fast turnaround times, not only from when you submit them, but when they announce that you're selected and that you are supposed to start working on them. Some of the other types of proposals that you might see pretty often are supplemental funding. This would be if you already have an award with NSF and you have something that you want to add. For example, a research experience for undergraduates, an RU, or some travel related to an award that you've got. Or maybe you had a piece of equipment break and you want to ask for that to be replaced. That could be a supplemental funding. If you're proposing putting on a conference that has interest to NSF, if you're going to do some type of research equipment investment, that would be an equipment proposal. If you need to travel to network with other people to develop some research ideas, and maybe you don't currently have an NSF award, but you believe that this travel would have a big impact on your ability to do your research, or that it might help contribute to you being able to do a full proposal in the future, then you could do a travel proposal. So those are just some examples of different types of special proposals. And there are special instructions in the general guidelines for doing these types of proposals. I'll also mention that NSF puts out what is called Dear Colleague letters. Usually they're just information, but I have seen a couple that had information in them that had on how to submit a proposal. And very often, sometimes those Dear Colleague letters types of submissions are ones where a component of the funding or the work is going to be done in the United States, and a component is going to be done overseas by an agency that is similar to the National Science Foundation. And so they've agreed to partner together to encourage international work together on a certain topic of interest. So now let's talk about deadlines, because you need to have an understanding of that so you can make a plan for when you're going to work on your proposal and get it submitted. If NSF gives you a deadline date, the time is 5 p.m. local, unless they tell you otherwise. And there is no exception after the deadline date, unless you have an unusual circumstance. So for example, NSF was closed for a snowstorm, or we had an ice storm in Oklahoma and the university closed, or you lost power because of it. Our servers crashed and you weren't able to submit. And I will also mention that those exceptions, you can't assume that you're going to get them. And as soon as you think you might need an exception, we need to go to the program officer and ask for that permission. And normally they are only going to give you an equivalent number of days. So for example, if it was due on Friday and you lost power Monday and Tuesday, then they would probably only give you 2 working days extension, because to give you more than that would give you an unfair advantage to the other people across the nation who are submitting to meet that deadline. If a deadline falls on a weekend or a holiday, NSF has a policy already in writing that extends that submission date to the following business day. So let's say you had a proposal that was due on Sunday and the following Monday was Martin Luther King Day, then the day that your proposal would be due would be Tuesday, because it wouldn't be due on Sunday because of their deadline policy, and it wouldn't be due on the holiday because of the deadline policy. So the next working day would be Tuesday. If in the solicitation they give you a submission window, then that means they're looking for proposals to be submitted within whatever that window dates are. But the final end date on that window is the same as the deadline date. They won't accept submissions after 5 o'clock local on that deadline date. A target date is a deadline that is kind of soft. They'll accept proposals after the deadline. But what that target deadline should cue you to ask is to talk to the program officer about when a review panel is going to be formed based on that target date. I would recommend that you consider a target date the same as a deadline date. What happens if you submit after the target date, if the program officer has already pulled the proposals for review, is that your proposal just sits there until the next panel is pulled for review, which could be 6 months. So if you have a target type of submission, either consider it the same as a deadline or talk to the program officer about when they think they're going to pull the review panel. I mentioned before a collaborative submission by multiple organizations, what that is. One of the things you want to know about deadlines related to those is that all of them have to be submitted at or before each deadline of the people involved, or the entire proposal is rejected. Sometimes PIs have thought that because, let's say, for example, they were submitting here and their person they were working with was in Oregon, that they had until the deadline was reached in Oregon to do the submission because that's when their collaborators' deadline was. And that would be false. NSF wants you to submit by 5 o'clock your time, regardless of who's involved in the collaborative submission. And if any one of the members of your collaboration miss their deadline, it kills the proposal for everyone involved. So if you have someone in Vermont that is involved in the proposal and you're involved in the proposal and there's somebody from Oregon involved in the proposal and the person from Vermont misses their 5 o'clock p.m. local deadline on the date that it's due, then that means even if you are allowed to submit by the system letting you go in, when they get to put them all together at NSF, the one that missed its deadline is going to stop the combination process and you will not be going forward. Some divisions in NSF having no deadline policy, so they have an open window or rolling deadline. And that means you can submit your proposal anytime you're interested in doing the submission throughout the year. I would also mention to you that this requires close communication with the program officer because similar to target proposals, you might miss a review panel that's being put together for a proposal. So if you do a no deadline submission and it comes in right after a review panel is pulled together or meeting, then you'll be waiting until the next review panel is pulled together. So when you're doing a submission to the National Science Foundation, the way your submission can go in is through grants.gov, FastLane, or research.gov. And we're going to talk about each of those a little bit. So in grants.gov, be aware that not all NSF proposals can be submitted through grants.gov, but most can. You can't do updates or revisions. OU has a grants.gov login, so you don't need to create one. You do still have to have a FastLane account set up. When we're loading the grants.gov information, we will actually use a software portion that we have that falls under the Cayuse software that we use for routing. That's called system to system submission. And we'll load everything into the Cayuse program and it will submit it to grants.gov after it does some electronic checking on it. So it gives us an extra layer of electronic checks to find things that might be wrong with the submission. So when you're loading it, there are some extra things that have to be loaded, like a checklist form. The budget and any subcontract budget information is a lot harder to load in grants.gov. And you have to be very careful with your file names, file links, and compatible, Adobe, things like that. The types of the files and the contents of them are the same as they are for Fastlane and research.gov. So like you'll still have a summary, you'll still have a description, facilities, biosketches, and all that stuff. Once you submit the proposal, you don't have any access to it in grants.gov. So you don't pull a print copy, you can't go back in and do an update or revision. What happens is that you do the submission into grants.gov and it gets dumped into either Fastlane or research.gov. And so it's not until it posts there that you can go in and do an update or a revision. This is one of the reasons why ORS recommends not using a grants.gov type of submission for NSF. Because if you notice that you've got something wrong and you're on the day of the deadline, you can't go in and fix it until it's posted in NSF in some manner, because you can't do an update or revision in grants.gov. So at OU, we consider that all NSF submissions are going to go in using either Fastlane or research.gov unless the PI tells us way in advance that they're planning on doing the submission in grants.gov, because of the extra time that it takes to load everything and the extra coordination that we're going to have to do with you on getting the submission in. So in both Fastlane and research.gov, the PI has to start the proposal. You only need one NSF ID number and password and affiliation with OU. Years ago, when research.gov was starting, some PIs created profiles in both Fastlane and research.gov. But about 2 years ago, NSF combined all those into one. So you should only have one ID now that works in both Fastlane and research.gov. All the organizations that deal with Fastlane or research.gov usually have a point of contact for someone to help affiliate your account or help answer questions about your account setup. And OU has that too. And we have a link in the grants section on the VPRP website where you can go and request information for how to like reset your password or do an affiliation with OU. Keep in mind that all of the co-PIs that you have on the proposal, and really any senior personnel, but is recommended, but they all have to have the information to let them be loaded on the cover sheet, which means all the co-PIs need an NSF ID. When you're in Fastlane and you're wanting to start your proposal, you'll go under proposal functions and do a create proposal action. If you're in research.gov, you'll go to a tab that says prepare a new proposal. And this will step you through all of the entries until you get to the page where you're going to load files under tabs. So one of the things that's very important is a PI has to give SRO or SPO access. So that's Sponsored Research Office or Sponsored Programs Office access. And this means you have to give us access so ORS can see it. You have 3 options that you can assign: read, edit, and submit. But you have to give us at least read and edit for us to be able to help you. We recommend that you do all 3 at once so that you don't have to go back in later just prior to submission and give us submit access. But that's your option of what you want to pick. We won't submit a proposal until you tell us that it's ready to submit. When you go to give us access, if you haven't loaded everything in the proposal, you're going to receive some warnings and some errors. And that's fine. You just hit proceed and it'll go ahead and let us have access. And you'll still have access too. If you need to assign a pin to your proposal, in the same area where you open the proposal, you'll see a tab where it says do the SRO access. You'll also see a little tab that says assign a pin or pin. You'll need to do this if you're working on a collaborative proposal and you're not the lead, because you have to go in and create a proposal, assign a PIN number to it, and give it to the lead organization so that they can pull you into the whole proposal. And it's also useful if you want senior personnel or someone who's not on the proposal, but who has a Fastlane account, to be able to access what you've loaded so that they can give you comments or critiques on the items that you've loaded, and you don't have to ferry files back and forth across different servers. Research.gov is replacing Fastlane. You can think of it like a Fastlane Part 2. A lot of features are the same. It does have improved file handling and error checking involved in it. Reporting has been done in research.gov for a couple of years now. So if you already had an award, you're already a little bit familiar with some of the research.gov screens. Most of the submissions can be done now in either Fastlane or research.gov, but effective this past fall, you'll see some solicitations that come out that say it must be done in research.gov. And it's very important to look at that very closely, because it is possible that there could still be a shell available in Fastlane, and the solicitation may say that it must be done in research.gov, in which case, if you submit in Fastlane, your proposal won't be reviewed. In the past, we had recommended using Fastlane as much as possible while they were working the bugs out of research.gov. We're recommending now that even if your proposal doesn't say to use research.gov, that if you have a simple proposal, especially one that doesn't have subcontracts, that you consider giving research.gov a try. We are hearing indications that they will be phasing out Fastlane at some point at the end of fiscal year 22 or 23. And we're supposed to see more and more solicitations come out as time goes on, until eventually there are none that will be referencing Fastlane anymore. So we'll do a few screenshots so you can see some of the what some of the screens look like. So this is if you were going into Fastlane. I want you to pause for a second and see the note that says advisories. You always want to take a second and look at those and see what they say. A lot of times they won't be applicable to what you're looking at, but this is where NSF will post deadline extensions in many cases, and they'll also post if there's an issue, like a known issue on a specific solicitation, or that they know servers are scheduled to go down for maintenance, or that NSF is closed because of inclement weather or something like that. That is the type of information that's posted in these advisories. Then the tabs that you're going to be looking at are along the top where it says proposals, awards, and status, proposal review, research administration, those types of things. If you are working in research admin, then you'll go under that research administration tab to see what information the PIs have loaded, or to load the budget or the budget justification, or to help out with other things. If you are a PI, you are always going to go in under proposals, awards, and status, unless you're working on one of the special functions, like you're on a review panel, or you're doing something with a fellowship program. So when you go under that proposals, awards, and status, this is what it looks like. It's telling you on the left, these are the types of things that you can do when you're in this tab. It's telling you on the right, this is the area that you go to log in to access this area. And it's telling you on the bottom, this is where you go if someone has given you a PIN number and they want you to log in and look at their proposal, but you're not involved in their team, or you're a senior personnel on their team, so you don't have normal access to it like you would if you were a PI or a co-PI. So you just go down there, you put your name and your password in, and you put in the proposal number that they gave you and the PIN number that they gave you. And that's what gives you access. Once you log in and you get your access and you go create proposal, these are the tabs that come up. You would be loading information in most of these tabs, and we'll go through more of those on part 2. So I just wanted to give you an idea of what that screen will look like. When you're logging into research.gov, this is what it looks like once you've done your login. If you're starting from scratch on a proposal, you'll hit prepare proposal, and it'll ask you several questions, and then it'll take you to the screen where you can load files. If you've got a proposal that's already in work that you've started on, then you'll go to the in progress proposals tab. And it'll keep files in there for a long time. In fact, if you've got test proposals that you've created because you want to see how something works, it'll keep those, and you can go back and play with them in the future if there's things that you want to look at. It'll keep things in that in progress proposal file until you delete them. Submitted proposals, this is where you can go in and you can look at proposals that have been submitted for you, either to do some type of an update or revision, or maybe you want to print a whole copy. So you can find your proposals there, unless you've withdrawn it. So in research.gov, this is what the tab screen looks like for where you load proposal information. And you can see on the right, it'll have whether documents have been loaded and whether or not an error check has been done on it. And a lot of the error checks are automatic. So as soon as you load a file, it'll check certain things to see if it catches anything that's wrong. So you know as soon as it's loaded if there might be an error related to it. You'll also see on the left, this is where you can share the proposal, like give ORS, read, edit, or submit access, and where you also do information related to subawards. The bottom part of that screen is here. So this is where you load optional information. And some of these tabs will vary depending on the type of proposal that you're doing. So like you might not see some of these screens all the time. So some other things that you need to consider. The routing process or completing of the internal routing process is what gives the PI and ORS permission to submit any proposal. You need to be aware if you're submitting information related to a subcontract or a consultant that you have agreement from someone with authorization to commit that organization to do that submission. And this is even on preliminary submissions. The reason why is, let's say that you have a proposal and you have Oklahoma State University on it and Harvard University on it, and they're part of your team, and you included their information in whatever was required in the LOI or the preliminary submission. And the program officers look at that, and the team is part of what they evaluate when they select who's going to be invited to do a full proposal. Well, if you haven't got permission from an ORS equivalent of the organization that's involved, that organization may decide that they're not interested in having their PI work on the proposal, or maybe their PI doesn't have the time available to work on the proposal and they're overcommitted. You don't want to have to go back to the program officer either right after they've given you permission to do a full submission, or at the point that they're asking you questions about why you don't have someone on the proposal. And tell them that you didn't have official permission to begin with, because that's probably going to be a question that they ask you. You need to consider who has what level of access in Fastlane and research.gov for whatever action that you're trying to do. So if it's for submission, you have access to start a proposal, a revision, or an update, and to do files. But the submissions are usually done by ORS. Agreements are usually done by ORS. Technical reports and the initial no-cost extension can be requested directly by the PI. Financial reports are done by REFS, the Research Financial Services. And I can't answer the question on how much you need to be involved in loading or providing those reports or how much they do. So that would be a question that you need to talk to someone in REFS about. Who's responsible for loading what parts in FastLane and research.gov? At OU, the PI is responsible for loading all the parts, except for the budget tab, which includes the budget justification. However, if a PDS has time and the workload availability, they may assist with loading other files like your BioSketch or current and pending. But don't count on getting that assistance if you haven't coordinated with it ahead of time. And if you're within the last half a day to a day of proposal, because they may have 15 or 20 other proposals due that same day, and they may not be able to support that heavy of involvement for loading files. We're hoping at some point in the future to have manpower increases so that we can provide more support in this manner, but we currently don't have it. On large proposals like MRIs and center types of proposals, we recommend that a PI take a member of their team or a postdoc who might be assisting them with the proposal and have them be responsible for loading the personnel files and collecting those. And we will gladly still check the formatting on those as long as we have time prior to submission. You also need to be aware of limited competitions that might be involved in NSF submissions, because those are very common to see. They may limit how many organizations can participate. And if they do, it's normal that we'll have some type of an internal competition. They may say how many can be submitted not only by the organization, but also if you're on a subcontract. They may say that you may only be able to do one as a PI, or possibly one as a PI and one as a co-PI. So the limitation may not just be on an organization, it might be also on team members. If you have a proposal that needs an internal competition done on it, that's done by ORS. Be sure to let us know as soon as possible. If you haven't seen a notice of intent come out on a solicitation that you're interested in, let your PDS or someone in ORS know that you're interested in a proposal that might have some type of a organizational limitation done on it. We don't do limited competitions related to PIs or co-PIs. That's up to you to track. We're looking mainly at organizational limitations. What happens if there's an organizational limit and more than one is submitted, that can cause all the proposals to be rejected, or they can decide that they're going to accept the first one that is submitted. And usually that's the PO's choice on what they want to do. In many cases, they will just not accept any. And it is possible, because of the number of proposals that go in, that a PI might miss that there's a limitation and the PDS might miss it too. So we have had instances come up before where we've had to negotiate with the program officer on which one of a proposal is going to be considered for review. So our takeaways for part one, if you're a PI, you've got to decide what divisions at NSF you have an interest in. And I would recommend, once you determine that, sign up for their listserv and check the information once in a while that they've got posted, because they all have their individual portions of the website at NSF. Keep an eye out for when the director changes, because director changes usually drive conclusion of some special interest programs and start of new opportunities for programs. Watch your program officer changes. So I mentioned program officers, but I don't think I mentioned that A program officer is someone from the field that goes to work at NSF for a 2 to 3 year period. And they're the people that decide who's going to be on the review panels. They have input on some award types of decisions. They can also give you information, like if there's particular budget type of information that you're looking for related to a proposal. Sometimes they'll look at a white paper that you send them. So if you're not sure about submitting to a certain division, or if you're not sure about a certain solicitation, send a one-page paper on your research and have them look at it. I've seen program officers come back and tell PIs that they were very interested in their research and to be sure and submit. I've seen other times where they told them that they weren't interested at this time in that type of proposal or research. And I've also seen them refer a PI to a different program or solicitation number, and even go so far as to forward the white paper and like an introduction to the other program officer that they think might be interested in the research that's being proposed. If you're asking your program officer questions about a budget or a direction that you should take, like whether you should submit to a certain solicitation or to their division, that's fine, but don't ask them specific questions about things that should be included in a budget usually. And don't ask them questions that ORS can answer or submission system questions, because they normally don't get very involved in submission system questions. The reason why I say, you kind of want to take your question first to your ORS contact is because it's likely that we can answer it either based on prior submissions that we've done to that directorate or other directorates, or maybe you missed it in the guidelines, because it looks kind of funny if you go to a program officer and you ask a simple question that's specifically in the solicitation of the general guidelines. When you're doing your proposal, you want to make sure that you consider the broader impacts of your proposal, and possibly also if there's any funds that need to be in the budget to support achieving your broader impact goals. If possible, you want to consider if an educational component can be included in your proposal. NSF likes to see workshops for training for people that are K-20 and under. Check the new PAPPG when it posts for comments. This usually happens in the fall. I had mentioned earlier that I was going to go into some of the issues with 20-1. When 20-1 was posted in the fall of 2019, there was a huge outcry because instructions in that draft copy were going to be that Science CV had to be used for all the biosketches, and that they would provide a PDF template for use if for some reason you couldn't access Science CV. But their intention was that you were going to use Science CV for your biosketch. There was such an outcry against this that they decided to delay when that was going to happen. And so they postponed when the actual guidelines became effective. They were supposed to become effective in January, and they didn't become effective until May or June. And even when they became active, they came out with a PDF template for both the biosketch and the current and pending, but didn't really require it to be used until October. So they're kind of stepping people into this. So those are things that you want to look at, because NSF does listen to the PIs. And when you see something that you have concerns about or you don't understand, let them know and post a comment when they post something for review, because they might change the instructions to make something more clear, or they may do extensions or things like they've done with 20-1 when it came out. I strongly recommend that you start learning research.gov. Fastlane is going away, and it's not the time to start learning research.gov when you're being forced to do it and it's your first time to ever open it and look at it. NSF has got like a play box or sandbox type of area in research.gov where you can play around creating and submitting proposals. They've also got some videos that you can watch on their website, not just on research.gov, but in general on how they operate and things like that. They have a lot of information on their website. So make sure you take a look at that. And that is all that I have for part 1 of this. If you're interested in going through the requirements for what goes in a normal submission, then you want to look at your NSF proposal submissions, part 2. Thank you very much for your time and attention.